You're heading south of the Mason-Dixon. This is the Week in Review at the Abbeville Institute. Here is your host, Brian McClanahan.
Welcome back to the Week in Review at the Abbeville Institute. This is Brian McClanahan, your host, and it's been a while. It's been about a month since we had this podcast for various reasons. Most importantly, we were doing some back-end work on the website, and which you may have noticed, we didn't run as many articles the last few weeks. In fact, we only ran about 13 since the middle of November. That also coincided with the Yankee Thanksgiving, so we took a little time off there, and we're going to actually be taking a little time off from here on out. So this is the last podcast for 2016. When we get to 2017, we'll be back at it weekly, but for now, this is it. So this is also a milestone. This is episode 52. So we started this podcast about 1 year ago, and I thought it would be appropriate because we would have so many articles to talk about, in fact 13, that I'd have to cover in a quote-unquote week in review. It would be more like a month in review, that I would talk about the year in review. I'll highlight a couple of things from these 13 articles that we had over the last month or so, but I thought it would be better to talk about the year in review and what to expect in 2017 from the Abbeville Institute. So before I say that, again, housekeeping as I always do at the beginning of the podcast, remember that this podcast, the website, all the things that we do exist because of your generous contributions alone. So if you would like to support the Abbeville Institute, if you would like to keep this podcast going, if you'd like to keep the website up and running and all the things that we try to do to educate the public and explore what is true and valuable in the Southern tradition, then I invite you to make a tax-deductible contribution to the Abbeville Institute. We will have some interesting ways to donate in 2017, so we're going to be changing that a little bit, but it still is the year end. You still have to get your final tax bill in order for 2016, so if you want to try to minimize what Uncle Sam will get out of your pocket, you can send us a little dough and some Yankee greenbacks, and we'll use them to denounce the Yankees. So it's kind of funny in a way. Also, remember to like us on Facebook, to follow us on Twitter, and to like our YouTube channel. We've got all of the lecture material that we had recorded for 2016 now on the website, so that includes the last conference that we did in Atlanta on Nullification and the summer school from 2016. So those are up on the website, and we will have videos for both of those for the two conferences on our YouTube channel, so if you want to go out there and watch them, you can. But that said, let's talk about the year. And gosh, this was just a very interesting year. A lot of things happened this year. You know, when we began 2016, we're heading into an election year, and of course, we saw, I think, what was a monumental shift with the 2016 election and what people are looking for or what they wanted out of the executive branch with the election of Donald Trump. Now, this also has started a discussion. Just as the Obama election in 2008 began a discussion in the South and in the West about decentralization, the Trump election has started a discussion about decentralization in the far West, meaning the West Coast in California and Oregon and Washington, about the merits of secession. So one of the things we've done for the last couple of weeks since the Trump election is run a few pieces here and there about secession and decentralization and how this is something we've been talking about forever. In fact, I was going back and doing some research and was reading a speech by Philip Pendleton Barber, who was a Virginian, an old Republican in the early 19th century, who later served on the Supreme Court. And Barber emphasized, and I think this is something we need to understand, Barber emphasized over and over again that the only way to really have a union, a fair union, is through the original Constitution, which is real federalism, where the states can decide most of the issues. And he said, well, this is accurate, that the problem with the central government is that when it accumulates too much power, it picks winners and losers. And by picking winners and losers, you create tension, you create friction, you make Americans angry. And as we look back at this year, and we look back at all the things that have been going on in 2016, And we find that Americans are angry. They're angry because they don't believe they're represented in Washington, D.C., and they're not. We've talked about that on this podcast before. We have a representative ratio of over 730,000 to 1. We have a general government that legislates on all issues, no matter how small or local. We have a federal court system that will overturn the will of the people. And I was just reading a piece that Clyde Wilson had written in 2014 on William J. Quirk, who was a law professor at the University of South Carolina. He died in 2014. And this is one of the things Dr. Quirk used to talk about the fact that the real problem with the government is that you see over and over again the central authority overruling the will of the people at the state level. We talk about democracy so much, but we think it's only in terms of the central authority and not really in terms of the real organic democracy, which is at the state and local level. We all want the central authority to do what we should be doing in our own backyard. We should be thinking locally and acting locally. And I think that's the real damage of the Lincoln regime and then that Lincoln legacy moving forward. It's that the center became the be-all, end-all of American politics. And we forgot that local and state authority was really the foundation, the pillar, the mossy pillar of this federal republic. That we have a four-legged stool, not a three-legged stool. And the biggest leg in that stool was always the states, always the people of the states. And that the other three legs were only there if you take that fourth leg out because it was so large that the table would fall over. And this was said over and over again during ratification, that if we minimize, even Alexander Hamilton said this, if we minimize the role of the states, the whole thing would fall down. Now, Hamilton, I think, was lying because he really didn't believe that. But as the Constitution was sold to the states during ratification, this is the point that over and over again the friends of the document made. We have to maintain the states. And so what we have, I think we've been sold a bill of goods in our entire lives, starting when we get our first civics education as a young person, that the real enemy to the government was always the states. This is how it's sold by the nationalists. When in reality, the real enemy to the government was nationalism, all along. It always was. We've inverted history, American history, on its head by saying that states' rights has always been the problem. No. It's always been centralization that's the problem, because that makes people angry. People in New England don't want to be governed by people in South Carolina. And it had always been that way, and people in South Carolina didn't want to be governed by Yankees out of New England. And now we see people in the middle of America, in the South, the real America, don't want to be governed by Californians or New Yorkers. At least leftist New Yorkers. That's not what they want. And people in California don't want to be governed by people in Alabama. And that's okay. What we need to understand is that's okay. Because if we had a real federal republic, it wouldn't happen that way. People in California could have their socialist utopia, and people in Alabama could have their real government. And we could forget about trying to merge incompatible things. The central authority could do what it's designed to do, which is have a free trade zone over the entire continent, and to protect the borders, to defend the United States. And so when we look at what's happened in 2016, and maybe what we're going to be looking at in 2017 with the Trump administration, I think we still need to have this conversation about federalism, because certain people are going to believe they're left out. And the best thing we could get out of this entire process, and the best thing we could get out of the end of the Obama administration, is that federalism needs to be alive and well. Just because Trump won doesn't mean that federalism, we need to cease having this discussion on federalism and the original Constitution, decentralization. It doesn't mean we need to go back from that. And I think that's something that we need to understand. Instead of punishing those who oppose us, be sympathetic with their position and say, yeah, we understand. We felt this way for 8 years. So the real solution to all this is to say, okay, you do what you want in California, and we'll do what we want in Alabama, and we'll leave each other alone. The commitment to decentralization has to be bigger than just lip service. And I think the left right now is just looking at it because they're irritated that they lost. But maybe they will find somewhere, somehow, a real commitment to decentralization. I don't know if it's possible. In fact, one of the pieces that I did want to talk about was a piece by Clyde Wilson entitled Liberal and Conservative. And he made a point in that he says, after the elections, it was seen that the parties except at the fringes that do not disagree on anything of importance, nor do they represent the people on any important issue. For instance, war, foreign aid, immigration quotas. On behalf of the imperial bureaucratic regime, the Democrats absorb and defang whatever liberal inclinations remain in their constituency, and the Republicans do likewise for the conservatives. He said the only difference is that the Democrats institutionally are wired to keep up the momentum of an already liberal state. And so this is the problem with the left. They do believe in the power of the central authority. They just want to be able to control it. And when they can't, they have issues. But what their objective is going to be for the next 4 years, again, is getting back control of the center. They're not going to look at it and say, well, we'll just take control of the fringe. We'll just take control of the constituent parts of this union in California. The problem is they don't control many of those constituent parts anymore. The real issue is centralization. Does America want to be governed by California? Because that's essentially what we'd be looking at. If we had real centralization now, California would be determining every election. So do we really want to be governed by California? I think that's the question that Americans need to answer and need to ask themselves if they keep pushing this idea of a national plebiscite for our presidential elections. Because if that's the case, we're in real trouble. So this year has been interesting, to say the least. We began the year with a conference in Charleston, South Carolina, on the PC attack on the South. And I don't think anybody was aware. This was in February of 2016. I don't think anyone was aware in that conference. We had a discussion about Trump there on the night before the conference, on Friday night, and what this would mean. And we all had ideas. I remember making a statement, well, Trump hadn't even gotten the nomination yet, but we were looking at it and saying, well, Trump says he'll look into something, but he's not making concrete policy assertions. And if you look at what's happened since, Trump has very much kept up that stance. And I said this was a beneficial thing. He's going to look into it. And I think one thing he was able to do is capitalize on this energy that people want. They want positivity. And I think that's one thing that decentralization can offer. It's a very positive way to look at the union. Okay, look, we're not saying that what you want to do in your backyard is wrong. Just don't make us do it in our backyard. You do what you want, we'll do what we want, and then we'll all get along better that way. I think this is where, again, history being inverted on its head, believing this Lincolnian myth of nationalization, actually which began with Alexander Hamilton and some of the other nationalists, but Hamilton most conspicuously. This is the problem with American history. So we had this conference in Charleston on the PC attack on the South, and again, no one knew what was going to happen at the end of 2016. And it was a very well-attended conference. We had almost 100 people, which was excellent. We gave away our first Robert E. Lee Award for an individual helping out with the Institute that's not one of the affiliated scholars, and we will do that every year. And I think what people got out of that was that how silly political correctness really is. And I think this is something that Trump was able to capitalize on during the campaign. People are tired of it. They want to call a spade a spade. They want to call an orange or an apple, and they want to be able to say these things without someone saying they're a bad person because they're observing society. We've gotten caught up in this idea you can't say reality. I mean, you look at something and say, well, that's not it. Even though it's happening the exact way you're looking at it, you can't say that. And, of course, we have boogeymen in American history that you can't champion, the South being one of them, the Southern tradition being one of those boogeymen. You can't say anything positive about the South because that will be seen as problematic. And so we're trying to change that at the Institute. What is true and valuable in the Southern tradition? What do we explore? A tradition has good and bad. But what is beneficial to get out of the Southern tradition? What can we use from the Southern tradition in our current American polity? And that's what our 2016 summer school is about. The Southern tradition and the renewal of America. Very positive look. What can the South offer American society today? And as we move forward into 2017, this is still a question that we need to answer. Because even though we have someone who is not as hostile towards the South now going to be in the executive branch, we still need to try to influence a positive direction for America coming out of the South. And what is that Southern tradition and what can it offer? And so we explored that at our summer school. And if you've never attended one of our summer schools, we'll be having another one in 2017. And in fact, we'd like to try to get 2 of them if we could. Probably won't happen this year, but we'd like to angle towards that in the future. These things are wonderful events. They're not just lectures and seminars. They're conversation. It's meals. It's excursions to wonderful places in the South. It's a real event of fellowship. So if you've never gone and you're a young person listening to this podcast, we do have scholarships. If you're a parent and you want to send your advanced high school student or college student, or if you're a graduate student, think about attending one of these summer schools. I think it would be highly beneficial for you to be around people that aren't afraid to love the South and aren't afraid to talk about the South and what it can offer for America today. And I think that's an important thing, a very positive message. One thing we've tried to do with the Institute in the last 3 years since we've revamped the website and doing this podcast in the last year and all those things is try to have a very positive message about what the South can bring to America. And it's not just about defending something, it's about exploring and advancing an idea and tangible things out of the Southern tradition that we can use in the future. And one of those things, of course, is the idea of state interposition or nullification. We had a conference on that in Atlanta in July. And that was another well-attended conference. We had a little over 80 people for that. And it was a one-day event. It was a trial that we're going to try to do. We're going to try to do more of these one-day type events. Only 6 speakers, but we talked about the idea of nullification. This is something that the South pursued longer than any other section. The South wasn't alone in its advocacy of nullification, but it was first with the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, and it pursued it longer than the other sections. Now, you could make an argument that in the North you had northern states advancing nullification in the 1850s. And we also talked about how this idea can be used today. We had a communications director from the 10th Amendment Center there do a talk about modern nullification and what states can do today. And this is the Southern tradition. This is putting this into effect. And I discussed conventions and how we should be talking about having conventions, the voice of the people. There are ways to reform the federal government if Congress would just do it through curtailing judicial power. They could do it if they wanted to, but people need to know that. In fact, I remember when I was doing the publicity for my last book, 9 Presidents Who Screwed Up America, I mentioned that in one of these interviews with someone that, the Congress could basically defang the federal court system if they wanted to by simply removing their jurisdiction over certain areas and also by removing the ability of individuals to challenge state laws in federal court. They could take that out. This is one of the major issues, even going back to the first Congress, when the first Judiciary Act, 1789, allowed for appellate decisions from a state Supreme Court to be appealed to the federal court system. You could just take that ability away, and then the state courts become the final decision. if it's a state issue. You can't then appeal to the federal court. You can't bypass the state courts. People will do this all the time. I saw an article the other day. There was a guy in Alabama trying to challenge these red light cameras. He didn't challenge it in state court. He challenged it in federal court. This is stupid. Now, of course, the federal court did right by saying, well, we don't have any, this is a state issue. But we shouldn't even have that in our mind. We'll just tell, this is a violation of my rights. We're going to go challenge it because the Bill of Rights say I have these rights. No. This is a state issue. Challenge it in state court. So we had these 3 wonderful conferences this year. Of course, the podcast we started in 2015, but right at the end. So we've had almost a year of podcasting, which has been wonderful. We've gotten a lot of great feedback off of the podcast. We've had another year of articles on the website, which well over 200 for the year. We've now got well over 1,000 articles on the website on all different topics of Southern history, culture, political thought, philosophy. And I think that's something that people don't often think about, that our website has become a virtual online library of Southern thought in many ways. We've got several series of lectures, all for free. If you couldn't attend one of the conferences, months later we'll put them up there and you can go and listen to those lectures, all for free. We've got the Jim McClellan Library, which doesn't often get discussed enough, but there are hundreds of documents about the American tradition of decentralization there. We, of course, again, have near 1,000 articles on the website on all things Southern. And there's something for everyone. You may not agree with everything on there, and that's the point, to get you thinking. One of the things we need to continually emphasize, and I think it's something we've done on this podcast quite a bit in the website, is that Southern history is not just a 4-year period, 1861 to 1865. In fact, Southern history is 400 years. And we need to understand that. We try to do a lot here on the podcast and the website explaining that the Southern tradition goes back beyond 1861. And I hear people say every now and then, well, I'm defending the South because I'm defending the Confederacy. Well, the Confederacy was only a manifestation of, at that point, 200 years of Southern culture. And this idea of what the original Constitution meant. If you want to defend the South, then defend the South, which is now 400 years of history. Or if you want to explore what the South is, then you got to look at 400 years of history. And a variety of different people. The South is not necessarily monolithic. And I think that's something that we need to grasp and understand about Southern history and culture and tradition. And so much of the South, particularly from our perspective, is unexplored. And I would like to see more of those unexplored areas explored, namely the late 19th century and the 20th century South. We don't focus enough on that period. There's a lot of great information there and a lot of great material and people that were saying and doing things that are still important for today. We focus far too much on the 4-year period and not enough on the entirety of history around that. Someone like Philip Pendleton Barber, for example, who's really forgotten, but was such an important figure at his time in the early 19th century. But nobody really knows anything about him, and there's so many people out there like that. The unknowns that can still speak to us and still provide us with tidings of antiquity, as Cicero said. So what's in store for 2017? Well, as I said, we're going to have, I hope, some creative ways to donate in 2017 and some more goodies that will maybe make it easier for you to donate in 2017, and almost a thoughtless process. You just click it and go, and you won't have to think about it again. So we're going to have some easier ways to help us explore what's true and valuable in the Southern tradition. We're still going to have our conferences. We're looking at one in Texas in the spring, and, of course, another summer school, and probably somewhere in the East in the fall of next year. We've already had some preliminary discussions about what we're going to talk about in those conferences. We haven't set it in stone yet. We are doing something in January that was an invite-only event, and it will produce, I think, something that's going to be beneficial for our listenership and the general public. And this is something else that the Institute does. It is an exclusive scholars conference we're going to have in January, where we're going to provide some intellectual ammunition for you as you go out and talk about the Southern tradition and what that means. There will be something coming out of that. And so this is what your donation also helps us do, is these things that are trying to advance the intellectual side of the South. And so it's not enough just to produce a website and a podcast, and we have to have people who are scholars who are willing to write and speak about the South and stand at the vanguard. A nice example of that is a couple of students who were former students of our summer schools who have gone on. One's actually getting a doctorate at University of Notre Dame now, and one is a lawyer. There's husband and wife, but they produced a challenge to this idea of this censorship at the University of Virginia. They both attended the University of Virginia, and so they were our students as well. So you can see how this works. You come to our summer schools, you follow us on our social media and read our website and read our papers, and you start going out there and standing in the breach, so to speak. You're trying to stop the assault. And we need those people. We need the people, everyday people who don't do that. But we also need the intellectuals who will do these kind of things, because we're vastly outnumbered. And that could change. The web is a wonderful thing for leveling the playing field. But that does take some effort on everyone's part to share this podcast, share our material, attend our conferences, speak to your friends, do things on your daily basis. And one thing I would always emphasize as you're doing this is be positive, not angry. Don't be angry with things. Just be positive. And be understanding. When someone says, I'm really upset with the Trump administration, I'm so afraid of what it's going to do, and don't necessarily laugh. I mean, some of the stuff that goes on, the adult coloring books and the Play-Doh and all these things that adults, the millennials are now doing. But be understanding and say, yeah, I know, we were there. We were there for the last 8 years. We know how you feel. So maybe we should rethink what we're doing here. Maybe if we left you alone and you left us alone, we would all do better. There wouldn't be any of this anger that you're now feeling, because it wouldn't really matter who's in the executive branch, because you would still continue to do what you do in California. And in so many ways, California is still doing that. Let them do what they want in California. We often think too much in national terms. But be positive about the South. Find the things in the South that are positive to pursue, whether it's music or food or literature or this political tradition of decentralization. Talk about how beneficial it is, and be proud of what you are. If you're a Southerner, be proud of it. Be proud of the things that the South has bequeathed to America, that the South at one time was America. This is one of the talks that Dr. Livingston gave at our summer school, when the South was America. It still is. I still say the South is America. I don't think it's a was. Really, and we saw that in the 2016 election. Trump capitalized on this American angst with how America was moving. Internationalism, globalism, loss of jobs, loss of financial security, political correctness. People are not happy with it. And I think that, I would like to think that in our small little corner of the world, we've helped advance the idea that you can still be positive. And Trump's campaign was positive. We're going to make things great. And part of that has to be the Southern tradition. Because that Southern tradition, when the Jeffersonian tradition was alive and well in America, you could say America was great. What's happened over time is that we've allowed this nationalist lie to seep in and destroy that Jeffersonian America. And with it comes corruption and ruin. Massive wars, massive debt, centralization of every issue. That's what is ruining America. And so by you continuing to support us, we can continue to point that out on a weekly basis, a daily basis through our website and through our conferences. And that's what I'm looking for 2017. I think 2017 is going to be a fantastic year at the Abbeville Institute. We're going to continue to grow and continue to reach more people. We do need your support to do that. But look forward to all the great things we're going to do. And we hope to see you at one of our conferences in this next year, at our summer school. Come out to these things. Meet people that think like you. And enjoy fellowship. I think what people often, they expect to see a bunch of people sitting around angry with scowls on their faces. We're so mad at everything. When I go to these conferences, I see people laughing and joking and having a good time and enjoying each other's company and being very positive about things. People might be upset, but the thing is, we have to understand we have to be positive. Life is far too short to be angry all the time. And I don't think I've really met that many angry people in all the years that I've been doing this. People just want to live their own life. And for people to stop telling them they're wrong. And I think that's something that you can get out of these conferences and get out of our material. And we're going to have a lot of great material coming up in 2017. So we hope to see you moving forward. And we appreciate your support and everything you've done. Until 2017, good day.